All right, Miss Demetria, how you doing today?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Better now that you're here. How's everything going?
Everything's going good. I'm in my hometown city of Chicago. It's a little
Okay.
rainy today, but the weather was definitely good last week.
Yeah. I was gonna ask. Yeah, where you were, Chicago's. I mean, best city in the world. Come like summer, fall time, right?
Yes, it is. There's nothing like summertime shy in Chicago.
Yeah.
The winters can be brutal. So,
Yeah. They
we
make you earn it. Yeah,
all we can out of like the summertime in the city. So
that's great. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna obviously welcome you to the Square Pizza Pod formally in a moment and get going. But now, since we're talking about Chicago, are you from there? Are you born there, raised there? Kind of what's the
yes,
connection
born
to
and
Chicago?
raised.
Okay.
Yes, born and raised. I spent some time in DC for about a decade. And then I moved back in 2016.
Cool. So you've been there for a minute, so you know like all the good stuff and
Yes, all the
all
good
the other
food.
stuff.
When I was in DC, my friends would call me and like put in food orders. I would be on the plane with like deep dish pizza, Garrett's popcorn, all the food that
Yeah.
people would like. So we're definitely a foodie city.
Somebody was just talking about Garrett's popcorn at a meeting in Charlotte here the other day randomly. So that's good branding for them. Good for them.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That is
I
a
guess since we're talking about food, what's your take on like the show The Bear, if you've seen it, since it's based in Chicago and about food?
No, I think it's great. I
Okay.
really like the show. My mom loves it. I have
Yeah.
friends that obsess over it. I like the fact that we're kind of giving some highlights to the scene in Chicago because
Yep.
everyone knows us like for food and our skyline, right?
Yeah.
So no, it's a really good show. I really like it. No, the fact that you asked me about that, my mom's gonna love it because she loves that.
Perfect. Shout out to mom and tell her like I got into the show too. It's great. Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
look for Chicago.
Mhm.
Um, I guess maybe last question before we officially dive in. I don't want to assume, but I just watched Hard Knocks and know that it was your Chicago Bears were featured on Hard Knocks. I don't know. Are you an NFL fan? You a Bears fan?
Oh yes. First of all, my family is a huge Bears fan.
Yeah.
Shout out to my father because when he watches this, he'll be happy that his daughter too.
I'm glad we got both parents covered. This is great.
Yeah,
This
both
is
parents
good.
showed up on the podcast already, so that's great. But no, I'm a huge Bears fan. I tailgate a lot with friends. I live close to the stadium, so yeah, sometimes they haven't been doing that good. We get really hyped when they have one win, and then when they don't. But no, I have been a Bears and a Bulls fan for years.
I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily, but you are on the podcast. So like Caleb Williams, the quarterback, is that the guy, or you feel good? You feel
It's
nervous?
funny
How are
because
we feeling about the
my
quarterback right
my
now?
dad and my brother was just like debating about him and like the history of the Bears and all the different
Mhm.
quarterbacks and what does it mean to have a good quarterback. So yeah, we have our fingers crossed.
All right.
Like
What a
that.
good, what a good political Chicagoan answer. Well done. Well
Yeah.
done. Um, Okay, Demetria. Yeah, man. So happy to have you on the podcast. So for the listening audience that doesn't know, we'll kind of formally pass it to Demetria in a minute. But an incredible leader. Kind of titles VP of Innovation and Ecosystems at VentureWell, which is a super dope title at a really cool organization that we're going to get into more about as well. But yeah, Demetria. First, thanks again for joining the podcast. Really excited to have you. And I think second, even before we get into like your day-to-day work, if we backed up a little bit, so many leaders we talk to on this podcast get into kind of this space of social impact in a variety of different
Mhm.
ways, right? So, and everybody has a different story and leadership journey. So just curious, kind of like what brings you to this work that you're doing on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, I've always been an advocate of underserved communities. My background is in urban planning. I'm an urban planner, um, right? And then especially as someone in like many major cities like Chicago, I grew up seeing how different neighborhoods got different resources that transcended to how businesses were invested in. So I really always been focused on how to bring resources and the talent pipeline and to showcase, different diverse communities. Um, so I went to DC in 2010 as a wet behind the ears intern. I thought I was going to save the world within the like President Barack Obama, like someone, like so
Yep.
many people, right? He was definitely like a historic moment.
Yep.
I got very humbled when they sat me next to the copy machine.
Started from the bottom.
Yeah, so I'm the bottom, right? So I remember calling my mom, like, yeah, the vision I had on the plane to when I actually got here. But it was a wonderful experience, and I definitely learned during my time in DC around the importance of public policy programs and budgets and how that was definitely formed. So I really started off my career and thinking around how we can invest more in those communities. And that started off with like minority business development, how to actually invest in the innovators of the future, which then led me to, we need to focus a little bit more on STEM. With the pace of innovation that's going on across the country. And this was then now almost 15 years ago, I really wanted to help diverse innovators understand that the importance of, like, regardless of what industry you're in, STEM has some overlap. So then that led me to tech transfer and ensuring how historically Black colleges and universities and how minority serving institutions were involved in more in the invention side and IP side of innovation.
Man, that's really cool. I mean, I think we're already fast friends, but just to confirm it, I was also an urban planning major back in the day.
Good.
And I don't want to say everybody should be an urban planning major, but the older I get and the more I realized how connected it is to at least my day-to-day life with living outside of running Shermco, but also just like the connectivity, whether it's like walkability or access to resources and or how schools are funded and how cities are built and policies are built. Like, I'm still semi-obsessed with urban planning. So I love that you also majored in that.
Yeah, I'm like a data nerd when it comes to it. Like, especially, in big cities, but Chicago, a lot of vacant land. I was surprised when I came back to Chicago 10 years later, a lot of the land that I wanted to buy and buildings I wanted to restore, unfortunately, was still having issues in the community. So a lot of times we don't understand how having a healthy, sustainable community, what it means for the resources you have, like you said, the schools you have. So, when I think about my career and, the expertise that I have gotten throughout the years, I like the fact that I kind of have these little pieces of the puzzle, right? What does it really mean to be innovative in STEM ecosystems across the country? And it's very different. Why? Because cities build differently. Cities, they prioritize differently when it comes to education, K through 12 and higher education, right? And we saw this when during those years in California with like Silicon Valley, right? Everybody rushed to California. So many budding entrepreneurs I saw during that time. They went there, had some great lessons, challenges too, about how to build their business. But where you are in the country matters, especially when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship. So I kind of like the fact that I can look at different regions and feel like, okay, this is what's going to work here for, STEM and innovation. This is what's going to work here. So it definitely lends itself to some great overlap.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, 100% agree. And Demetria, connect us to kind of like, so that background is really helpful about how you got here. And now tell us like what here is. You got a super dope title, which I think I know what it means, but I want to know more. And VentureWell, from everything we know, is also feels like a really incredible and innovative organization. So yeah, maybe tell the people kind of what you do. Well, maybe start with VentureWell, kind of give us the macro level of like what the org does and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so, VentureWell, we're a 28-year-old STEM nonprofit that accelerates innovation and entrepreneurship across like various audiences. But we do have some primary audiences that's with, of course, higher education, like the federal government. And this also includes the startup community with like venture development. So one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is that all of the great people that are actually in STEM doing R&D have great ideas. We help those ideas to really bring them to life and try to help folks create a profitable business model behind that, right? So the one thing, right, it's very important for people to understand that how we accelerate it in STEM ecosystems is that it's very different than, general entrepreneurship. These are folks that actually have great data, great research that usually comes from an academic setting where we have to then influence those folks about the importance of how do you think like an entrepreneur, right?
Mm.
Why is your innovation so great in maybe a lab setting, and now we have to bring it to life, and it may make sense so we can actually like become a business. But we're also a huge like federal contractor. We
Mm-hmm.
work with NIH, NSF, SBA, just various federal agencies to either elevate their program or their programs, our services, or to kind of make come in and think around how we can help that like federal agency on some of their tech transfer efforts.
Wow. So I know not there's a lot there, but I think what I heard you say is like almost helping maybe professors or higher ed institutions become entrepreneurs. And if that's true, not always push back if you disagree, but
Yeah,
not all academics are good entrepreneurs all the time, right? So you
there
probably
are
got to do a lot of
some.
you probably got to do a lot of pushing there, right?
But especially in my role, we have a history of educating faculty members and institutions on how to embed I&E into the classroom and in the like campus environment, right? We all know that a lot of well-resourced institutions, they've been doing this for like almost a decade, right? And so we pride ourselves on having great learning lessons in which for faculty members and higher education institutions that really want to say, hey, now we want to like prioritize I&E on a campus. We come in and we help that in three main areas. That's in courses, programs, and policies.
Mm.
And this is also very important too. We know that student innovators, and especially experts in this space, they like to test their ideas. So a lot of times the classroom is the foundation in which this happens, right? But to actually test it, there's a lot of curricular programs we have definitely elevated throughout the years so people can understand what is the evolution of, hey, I have a great idea, this is great, I've learned the foundations in the classroom. How can I really make sure that the next generation of student innovators are implementing those ideas to real business models?
And I don't want to break it down too much, but in a nutshell, you're kind of helping higher ed institutions innovate and become more relevant for where we are.
Yeah, and think differently, right? Especially around ecosystem, ecosystem building. For quite some time, higher education institutions have been central to regional economic development. Right. If you go to some of these regions across the country, when you think about how industry and government work, higher education is right there collaborating with them, trying to work alongside them. So for some institutions across the country, especially in the HBCU, tribal college, and MSI community, they don't have a history of that success. So in my role, and especially when we think about the evolution of VentureWell, we're really focused on making sure those institutions are prepared to work alongside industry and government in their regions.
And I got to imagine since COVID, probably your work has become even more important, given that there's been some struggling higher ed institutions with enrollment decline, and of course, tuition going up in a lot of higher ed institutions across the country. So tell me if I'm wrong, but I'd imagine your work has been even more elevated given the importance of pushing our higher ed institutions to innovate.
Yeah, and I think too, coupled with COVID, but also the student demographic is very different now. Right? They're leading with a lot of innovative ideas, right? Me and my nephew, he's a, young college student. We always joke about YouTube University, right? The students' ability to get information, to start businesses, and to be inventive is right there at their fingertips. So now when they go to universities, right, they're very picky on what resources are on campus. Right, not only through the business school, but through maybe a liberal arts college, or maybe through definitely engineering. Right, so the student demand for I&E has also changed, which has then changed how university leadership, provosts, chancellors, and presidents think differently on how they put I&E in their budgets.
Yeah, that's really cool. And give people a sense, Demetria, if you could, of kind of like the size and the scope of VentureWell. Like I think you're national. I think you guys have a pretty good size staff, budget, like anything you feel comfortable helping the audience understand how big you guys are.
Yeah, so we have over 100 employees at VentureWell. We're definitely a $multi-million nonprofit that has been like successful throughout the years. And it's funny because we just had a great meeting today with the exec team where we talked about, what is our superpowers, right? And one of the things that I think we pride ourselves on is that we're definitely able to find and work with partners in creative ways to find funding to make sure that we demonstrate impact in the areas that I have that I discussed earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, thinking about superpowers and reassessing those for any organizations are a really good best practice. Good for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing we saw in the bio, or at least on the website, was you guys have funded 770 courses or programs that I think started as tests and are still going on at higher ed institutions. So you think about like, strategically testing some things, figuring out if it works, hopefully it does. And then if it doesn't, make some maneuvers and keep it going. But having, maybe began and then continue to run 770 programs at higher ed institutions, that's pretty incredible track record. So, I mean, I don't know if you can speak to all 770, but can you talk about some of what that success looks like, or like examples of that?
Yeah. So, that our course and program grant, that was a very, long-standing grant within our higher education vertical, in which, again, we provided funding to faculty and institutions so they could create courses on campus. And a lot of times, this was the first time that maybe an institution actually had a course for I&E. Right. So we definitely saw this as like catalyst funds.
Yep.
So then they could go to their decision makers at the institution to say, look, this is working. We want to expand it. Some courses were then they became like standardized courses like throughout the campus. And it really grew a large cohort of faculty leaders where they went and got large grants to build centers, to build out like some courses for like certification. So it was really a catalyst so we could make sure that I&E not only started on the campus, but it was there for long term. So now that course and program grant has transitioned into a new fellowship program called the Ecosystem Futures Fellowship.
Okay.
Which now it's very similar, but we're really looking to gather some of the best minds in I&E to ensure that we're thinking beyond courses, right? Courses are very important, but as I said earlier, that's the foundation of the work, right? We need to make sure that they're working closely with university leadership so we can think what happens outside the classroom with programs and policy.
And I know it's a lot, but can you give people like one or two examples of what some of these new courses or new programs look like that you're helping to fund?
Yeah. So, for example, there are a lot of different research labs in which if a student or a researcher or a faculty member has a great idea, right, they learn this in the classroom, but they can actually test it. So we're, because that's important, right? We all know that if you have an invention, there's different ways it can be used, different disciplines, right? Like if somebody would have told us years ago that we'll be jumping in the cars with strangers getting rides.
Talk about a test. Talk about trying some stuff out. Right?
Try some stuff out, right? So
yeah.
These co-curricular activities, from research labs to different programs that definitely allow the students to work with industry so they can actually see what's going on in real time in the field, really allows the student to build the characteristics of an inventor, right? We want, because to be an inventor, you got to have thick skin, right? You got to be able to take a couple bumps in the road to make sure that you actually have like a viable product. So that's what we want to ensure. We want to keep the foundation in the classroom, but we want to make sure this fellowship opportunity really showcases some good examples of what happens to the pipeline of, oh, I have a great idea, to wow, I can test it, to wow, this is something a business model that maybe I can actually use to build a business off, or just be an expert in the I&E field.
Yeah. I love that. Just to be selfish for a moment, like when we do a lot of strategic planning with clients across the country, we have an actual phase in our process called strategic testing. And so instead of us just kind of finding themes, ideas, and then kind of writing it in the final plan, we try to work really closely with clients to do some like mini tests along the way, figure out if any of the recommendations will actually work in the real world before we document it and put it on paper. So I love the expansion that you guys are doing, but obviously in a much deeper way to help these higher ed institutions and faculty members and students test what's going to work and what's not, rather than them just kind of going out and selling everything and moving in with 8 people and everything else. Like these like small strategic tests in our work, I think that have allowed us to collect really good feedback and like an evolution learning cycle and then help our clients. And I love that you guys have a pretty similar model as well.
Yeah, and you got to think the pace of innovation calls for it. A lot of what we do and a lot of the programs are where we are creating business models. Like we have a great E-Teams program that's been around for quite some time. It's a 5-stage like accelerator in which it brings teams in and we, test different business models. But we're also very focused on sustainability, right? So, this social impact side, like, there's some great businesses that we create, but the fact that we are bringing a large group of innovators along with us to tackle some of today's largest and most, I want to say largest, let me back up, more important problems through business like innovation is something that we definitely like pride ourselves on.
Yeah. And you mentioned the ability to have thick skin, and I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, but indulge me if you will. But like there's like the core business model of like economics and revenue and expenses. But the longer I'm a business owner, and we just celebrated 10 years last month, the more I'm convinced, to your point, it is around like thick skin, persistence.
Yeah.
Just like the mindset of like making sure you're getting up and giving it a go each day. Like the business model is important, but the persistence to stay in the game, knowing a lot of tough stuff is going to happen the longer you stay in the game, trying to scale social impact work feels almost like a pretty important variable as well. Is that something you agree with or see?
No, I definitely agree. I think definitely even in the general entrepreneurship realm, but when we talk about how do you innovate in STEM ecosystems, the pace, again, I keep, emphasizing this because the pace of innovation, you have to be able to test, like I said, take some of those bumps in the road, get feedback quickly, and then go maybe reinvent your business idea. So, and then we sometimes don't give enough credit to the importance of those characteristics that are built during that process, right? When you learn to take feedback well, when you learn that this, because a lot of inventors and entrepreneurs have this great trait of being curious, right? How do I solve this problem? Like, how do I do that? Those are lifelong traits that can be applied to various fields, even if you end up going, like a different direction. So that's why I think it's very important that, not to address some of these important challenges as America that we're grappling with now because of the pace of innovation, that it's just a smart business move to ensure that higher education institutions are embedding that in their student demographics and with their faculty, so everybody is ready and agile as the innovation field continues to move.
Well, you're probably seeing this too. Like not every adult is great at receiving feedback at a practice level or used to. Like I played sports growing up, so I was used to getting cussed out since I was like 8. So like professional feedback is easy for me, but like not everybody has that experience, right? And so it's like creating the safe space and understanding that like, this is feedback to make, it's not personal feedback, it's feedback to make X initiative or X venture better. But just like the feedback realm, you got to be really tricky in a professional way of how to do that in a safe space, but in a way that continues to push innovation.
Yeah, and that's what as someone that works very closely with congressional officials on Capitol Hill for years, I definitely got my thick skin. Working in DC, I always tell people you have to have an armor of confidence to survive in that city. I created that during that time, various like national programs And so imagine creating a program on a national level and getting various regions giving you feedback and everything. So I just think it's important that we understand that to really grow the American pipeline, especially when we think about like diverse audiences, we really need to embrace all of this great talent and give them the right direction so we can actually make sure that we're succeeding in STEM ecosystems.
Yeah. And to connect that to, I think, to a new initiative, you guys are doing some pretty innovative work with HBCUs and MSIs as well
Yeah.
with this upcoming fellowship. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that I'm working on, especially with some leaders in this space, is that changing the narrative around the HBCU and MSI community. It's often for the last decade been dismal and grim. There's no funding that goes to them. Some of them were closing, student retention. So I've been very adamant at thinking about this from an asset-based approach. These institutions are doing some dynamic things,
Yep.
Especially in the R&D space and the innovation and entrepreneurship space. And we need to lean more on that, on the capabilities that this community is doing, so we can be aligned. And what does that mean for funding? What does that mean for partnerships? How do we make sure that they're aligned to actually embed I&E on their campus? So for this fellowship, we are excited to engage the community so we can help them with those resources. So then the university, like decision makers, can begin to prioritize I&E on their campuses. And of course, we know, like, we have to talk about the challenges, but until we change that narrative, it's going to be very hard for funders and partners to actually be strategic in how they direct those resources to those institutions.
And where is this in kind of the journey in terms of like how many HBCUs and MSIs you're currently working with? Is this new or is it pretty baked out? Like, help us understand the scope of this.
Yeah, so VentureWell has definitely in the last 5 years been very focused on this demographic to ensure that there are not only embedded in our existing programs and services, but also in the new fellowship. So VentureWell has had a long history, even before that 5 years, in making sure they engage diverse audiences. But I think there has been this very leadership focus. Okay, wait a minute. What is the evolution of the organization? And what does it mean to actually provide our own investments to different institutions? Because we all know the elite institutions, the John Hopkins, Harvards of the world, they look very different to the student body and faculty when it comes to different institutions that are not as well resourced. So we have definitely taken a more strategic approach in saying, yes, we can learn from the elite institutions. We still want to engage with them, but we just want to make sure our investments are a little bit more tailored to institutions that need those resources, so we can make sure that there is a diverse pipeline of innovators.
Wow. And I think maybe just to go also deeper, but a little, I believe a separate program. And also, I think maybe connects back to what we're talking about regarding urban planning and the importance of connectivity and transportation. But tell us about this mobility work, this kind of flip space mobility work in Arkansas.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. I kind of nerd out on the Federal Laboratory Consortium. I don't know if you people are familiar with that, but this is the governing body within the federal government that manages all the federal government 300 plus federal labs across the country. And a lot of people aren't really educated on how much research and development actually comes out the federal labs.
Yeah, sure.
Baby formula, iPhones were created from, I think, 8 patents from the federal labs, escalators, memory foam, all of these stuff that we use as products.
All good stuff. All good stuff.
The steering there, GPS system, all this cool stuff that we use was actually started off in the government through investment, through R&D. So we're partnering with partners in the Arkansas region to take a lot of that great IP in the transportation and advanced mobility space to work with university teams to think about, okay, great. Now we have this great inventory of patents. Let's see what business concepts we can actually develop with the teams in Arkansas. So we're very happy. You know, we got like support from that, from the Walton Family Foundation, and we're just really excited to see how we can then engage with not only like the federal labs, but with these great teams to see what they can innovate in this topic.
Yeah. And the focus is transportation or more connectivity. So does that, like, I would assume like less cars, less highways, more bikes, more
Yeah, and
greenways.
it can be pretty broad too, because when we think about advanced mobility, a lot of the times we think about things that happen on like the physical land, right? But that can be some great stuff that we can work with NASA, right? Because they also think about, you know, air transportation. When we think about it's also focused on how we actually think about the like supply chain and
Okay.
what does that means for like the transportation of products and services. So we have a broad like definition for it, because we want to be able to think around transportation a little bit more broadly because of all of the great IP that lives in the federal government.
I'd imagine maybe potentially some environmental benefits as well as a result of some of these innovations that will be coming.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that I've been involved in a lot of similar programs.
Okay.
And it's a lot of these university teams, even if there is not a sustainability focus, they tend to lean towards that.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So then it makes me think again how young innovators are thinking very differently, and they're prioritizing this whole issue and making sure it's embedded in different business models.
Yeah. Demetria, one thing coming to mind is like, of all these cool things you have going on, and maybe a little bit of a tough question, like how you think about measuring success.
Yeah, you know, I think I would never forget, because I'll bring up when I was on Capitol Hill years ago, and there was a change in like the presidents, and so this, you know, older congressional member had asked me, "Oh, so what are you going to do now?" I'm like, "I don't know. I think I'm going to go back to like Chicago, and I'm going to start my own firm." And he's like, "Just remember that video is going to be king." And then video wasn't like it was now, like all the different podcasts and everything, right? So,
Interesting.
and so I remember, and I often think back to that advice, because now video is king, right? How we tell our stories matter. People just can't set up a booth at a conference anymore and think that that's going to be impact, right? People actually want to feel moved beyond standard data like reports, right? And numbers. They want to see, tell me the story. So I think for us at VentureWell, we've had a successful track record in not only telling our stories, but making sure that there's data that's embedded. So when I think around the future of not only VentureWell, but impact, like we need to actually show and prove, like through videos, through a lot of things on like social media, on who's impacted by our work. Right? Like it's totally different when we say, oh, okay, we have these numbers of innovators that we impact, when we actually have innovators talking about their programs, like talking about their businesses. So I've been impressed in what the private industries along with the nonprofit sectors have done to actually showcase that impact through storytelling.
Yeah, so important, right? It almost feels like there's been a change where maybe 5 years ago it was so much around like all the data, all the quantifiable results, and
People would send you long reports for you to read through. Oh, this is the data and the numbers. And then like everything sounds good. But anytime you're talking about, oh, we invested $10 million in something, right? All that sounds good on paper. But then I think a lot of funders and partners were like, no, we need to hear more.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been impressed with. So when I think about impact, I definitely tend to lean on more about the power of storytelling.
I love that. That's cool. All right, let's get you out of here on a few fun and hopefully rapid fire questions.
The fun questions.
We'll see. Fingers crossed. Best or favorite restaurant in Chicago?
Oh my God. Okay. One of my favorite restaurants. Oh man, I want to make sure I give homage to
We'll get you in trouble with some of your Chicago.
Yes, I'm like, oh, I have to really okay, it's a restaurant called Cleo's.
Okay.
On the south side of Chicago. It's great. They recently went viral for like some of the great food that they have. They had some foodie come in and, recognize them. But yeah, it's on Cleo's on the South Side. That's one of my
Cleo's.
favorites.
Okay. Shout out to Cleo's.
Yeah.
What's one musical artist you're listening to right now?
Oh, Jill Scott. I'm huge on neo soul. I love neo soul music. Soul Child, Eric Roberson, Anthony Hamilton. But I was recently in Philly, and that's where she's from. So I felt like I had to channel her somehow.
Yeah.
So I've been listening to Jill Scott for the last week and a half.
Speaking of Philly, I just saw Boyz II Men in Charlotte a few weeks ago.
And Boyz II Men was in Chicago too.
They still got it, which is impressive.
Yeah, I'm actually impressed on how good they look.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They were great.
Yeah. Yes, no, I remember as a little girl, I used to wait till when they came on the radio to press. That's when we had like cassette tapes to actually record it. And I loved Boyz II Men, so I'm happy that you brought them up.
And Anthony Hamilton's coming out with a new album next week. I was just talking about it the other day.
Yes, I love Anthony Hamilton. I've seen him in concerts for quite some time, but I was recently listening to his Tiny Desk concert, which is, oh my God, phenomenal.
What's one thing the listening audience can do to support you and VentureWell?
I think just thinking about partnerships. VentureWell, we pride ourselves on, having some really good, like, strategic partners. And during this evolution, we're looking to expand what that actually means for new programming. So we would just love to see how we can work with new folks and bring them to the fold of in our ecosystem.
Are we talking higher ed institutions? Are we talking nonprofit leaders?
Yeah, I think it's, nonprofit, even some government agencies, and of course, like different, like universities, because our work spans different audiences that prioritize, of course, thinking about higher education institutions, but that definitely spans anyone in the I&E ecosystem.
Cool. Last question. What does Square Pizza remind you of, Demetria?
So in my high school, people used to like gather at the lunchroom table and like tell jokes about each other. I don't know if you heard of, it's this thing called roasting. Was like,
I don't want to say I invented it, but I was definitely the receiver of some roast.
Yes. So, and my brother was in high school. He was like known as like the main roaster. So when I really learned about the title of the podcast, it just reminded me of like sitting down, eating a square pizza, laughing as me and all my friends were engaged in like these roasting activity. But I really commend you guys on having a very unique brand.
Well, I love the roasting. That hasn't come up before. People have talked about the high school tables and like having fun at lunch, but nobody's taken it to the next level of like, this is when I made fun of everybody in all my
Yes. I sat there. Now I wasn't the best one, so I just sat there and like partaked in like laughing. But I had some friends that definitely knew how to do it. But yeah, no, I think it's a great brand that you guys have because it makes people be curious. Like I told a lot of my network about the podcast I was going to be on. They're like, oh wow, so they were asking questions about it. So that was very smart branding.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll take that compliment. Ms. Gallagher, man, it was awesome. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
No, thank you. This has been great.
And look forward to keeping you in the network and seeing all the great work you guys keep doing.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.